Hi guys, welcome back to another video. Peter Kennedy, Kennedy's Garage, Portlaw. What do we have today? We have a 2018 Ford Focus 1 litre EcoBoost, and I have done, excuse me, I have done a wet timing belt on one of these before, and it is potentially one of my best performing videos on YouTube. A wet belt. On the last one, I hit a few problems where I had a bracket for an exhaust was welded, so I cut an exhaust and a few little bits and pieces like that. And people might have sometimes said, what did you cut that for? That's foolhardy, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I was doing it for a reason, but I probably most likely didn't explain it good enough of why I was doing it. So on this one, I believe we have an untouched car that should be fairly straightforward, but we're doing a wet time belt or two. I've gotten the bits and pieces from the main dealer. Lads are going to ask me about the mileage, so I can see there we have 132,000 kilometers. But also on first startup and entry into the workshop, I see we also have a check on engine light on, which will be called the money light by Eric O, and from South Main Auto. First of all, before we start talking about a timing belt, I'm going to arm myself against any chances that someone might say, oh, I thought that was on because of a wet belt or a timing belt being needed or oil pressure related problem or whatever. So I'm going to plug in the scan tool, see what we have there, and at that point move forward on a relatively fast wet belt disassembly and assembly. Okay, I have the locking tools for this. I do not have a torque converter. I'm probably not going to give ye the masses loads of torque. So if you're sending me messages looking for a torque on this and a torque on that and a torque on the oil pump and a torque on that, I don't have the time to go, you know, if 20 people in a week look for torques, I don't have the settings, I don't have the time to go looking and rummaging at that. I have a business here to run, and that's what I do primarily, and throw in the mix of that then with a couple of videos for you to try and show or help you towards maybe doing some of this crack yourselves. What you should be expecting to pay here, I'm setting a number around 13, 14, 1500 euros, depending on the place or the workshop or the garage. We're going to drop the sump off it, change the two belts, and see where we end up, okay? That's where we're at right now. We're going to get a scan tool into this and see why that thing is on. Tinker car up and on and a high-speed scan happening. Just going to see, do I really care what's in here? No. All this crack, I believe, is happening because of stupid LED bulbs that are flashing and all that kind of weird stuff. And I saw one here flashing. There's a puddle lamp, but I'm not bothered by that. So in powertrain control module, we have one fault. Ooh. Nice. Okay, so what that basically is saying, P0420 catalyst system efficiency less than threshold. So am I going to be focusing on that right now? Potentially not, but I am going to have a catalytic converter in my hand, and is this man want me to go dig a bit deeper to try and see, is there an issue in here? So what could be given that? It could be the catalytic converter, it could be, you know, a lambda sensor or an air leak or something like that, basically, that's causing the catalyst or the catalytic converter not to be able to do its job good enough. So if in a very fast explaining format, the first lambda sensor, so if that's the engine and we have the exhaust system coming out here, the first lambda sensor is going to be switching between 0.2 and 0.8 volts. We'd usually use 0 and 1 as a number. So it's going to be switching rich, lean, rich, lean, rich, lean, rich, lean, rich, lean, trying to get the fuel system to run as close to stoichiometric as possible, but they can't achieve it. So they'll go too rich, take away fuel, too lean, add fuel, too rich, take away fuel, add fuel, blah, 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 so on and so forth. The second lambda sensor is going to be looking at what the catalytic converter is doing, which in turn then will give us that fault. So once it goes through, once that gas goes through the catalytic converter, it then carries on the second lambda sensor. So there's lambda sensor 1, lambda sensor 2. It carries about somewhere between 0.5, 0.6 of a volt, 500 millivolts, 600 millivolts, and relatively flat lining. If you zoom in, you will get slight discrepancies on it, but it will be very, very small oscillations. But is that our problem right now? He's asked me to do a wet belt. I'll make a phone call just to confirm that he's happy enough for me to drive on and that this is an issue for another day or what. I'm going to leave it in, but I'm going to get a belt onto this at this stage. Show and tell, guys. Point 2, point 8. Second lambda sensor. Sensor 2. Starting to clean up as we're getting hot. So the car was idling there cold and we had a lot of oscillations at the start. As it's getting warm, we're starting to see maybe 600 or 700 millivolts, and it's starting to come down. Not too enamored or worried at this point in time. I have to say now we're becoming really good now, so our oscillations are going away. We're nearly doing exactly what I want to see. Slight little bit maybe rich, but we are actually flatlining there now. So little bit. And all happening at 0.7 of a volt. I think I'm not going to worry about it. I'm going to drive on, get our belt on. First thing we're going to do anyway, I'm going to pull off a wheel, liner, under tray, a few bits and pieces of that. Then I'm trying to, Alan is singing over in the corner. I'm going to go in, get rid of some of these air intake pipes. I'm going to take off the exhaust manifold and the turbo in there. That's fairly relatively straightforward. So that stuff, anyone who's going in here to do a time belt is going to be easy enough able to get off this stuff. But I'm going to start by that. So all these bits and pieces off, gone out of my way, get access in here to our time belt. Injectors, coils, all these bits and pieces need to be removed off the top for the rocker cover to come up off the top. That high pressure pump, etc. That's where I'm going to be starting the ball rolling and ripping this apart fairly fast, fairly light. Alan is testing out this yoke that we have on trial run here, an induction heater, which we don't. The reason I cut the last exhaust was because these bolts, nuts, on the top. Alan is now reddening up this baby, are we? Yeah. So this is what we're at, is trying to get off these with an induction heater, and it's working a treat there at this stage. Bada bing, bada boom, bada bee. Well done to that yoke. Hey, boy. Nothing like a great bit of equipment when it works. That was actually a good test for it, because I'm just going to show you here. So I'm going to leave down the lift. We have... I'm not doing this very well now. I'm trying to do it with one hand. The bolts look are actually in a bad enough old state, i.e. they're kind of worn after rusting, and someone on the last car had been in there before me and actually put in that also. So that one's probably in a worse state. Not much to grab on there. You can see it, but in fairness, a bit of heat and a 14 or a 15 socket has pulled that off for us. Now, up the top, I've ran around. I've done a bit of taking off of the air pipes and stuff first. So, air intake pipe from the intercooler up to here, air intake pipe from our turbo up to the intake manifold, a couple of HVAC pipes around there, sitting around, but they're kind of gone. I'm going to be rolling on. I'm going to start taking off turbo, exhaust, system catalyst, coils, and a few bits and pieces like that there next, okay? Pulling it apart. There's something strange going on there. Now I have taken out that bolt, but it looks polished here, and that bolt was like that. So the inductive heater is out again. Try and see if I get it out, number one. But something's been happening in here. It's kind of yellow stuff down there, yellowy stuff around here. I don't know. Someone had to put in here before me anyway. Catalyst system problem, huh? Catalyst off at this point in time. What I meant to mention a couple of moments ago, and I didn't do it to anyone, was don't touch that nut in there. Do not touch it at this point, okay? So anyone who thinks I'll just open that to go in and have a look, do not. The pulley has to be in a certain position. The minute you loosen that nut, it rotates, and when it rotates, if you don't have locking tools or all that crack, you're kind of a poo alley. So what I'm saying is leave that alone. I'll give you markers or pointers on, I'm going to use the locking tool kit, but I'm going to give you markers and maybe how to try and pull this thing off if you don't have them, okay? But in the immediate, just don't touch that while you're disassembling all of these bits and pieces. If that makes sense. Oil feed, oil return. That's easy to get at from the bottom, lads, once the once the catalytic converter has gone out of it. 4 bolts then holding on the turbo. And I generally lift it up out of place so I can get in at that pipe somewhat easy, because it's kind of awkward down here. Air conditioning pump has been taken off down below, 3 bolts. I've actually just, there's loads of room on the AC pipe, so I just swing it to one side. And right, that's off. Time to start doing a little bit of disassembly up here. I have removed coils, injectors, rocker cover, high pressure pump. It's actually just sitting there. And yeah, a little bit more access starting to come about. Little couple of bits and pieces starting to sit on my beta tray or trolley. I think next what I'm going to go after is I've drained the oil on this, and I have taken off the oil filter to gain access into the starter motor. So for me, I'm going to go along and I'm going to lock this thing, lock the engine via the locking tool. This is actually the timing kit. Sits there, straightforward enough, but this component locks the flywheel from where the starter bolts sit in, okay? And that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to rotate my engine, timing it up, putting on probably my camshaft locking tools and that pin in the bottom, putting that into place, lock the crank, undo the crank bolt, and then start rolling backwards from that point. That's where I'm going to go. At this stage, I'm going to be heading down, I'm thinking the bottom. No, actually I had the bolt out of the starter at the bottom, so I have to run down here for a size 10 that's holding in my starter motor at this point in time. And then I'm going to rotate, line myself up on the top, get this belt off. So what's the condition of the belt like? There's cracks there. Not so bad though. I can see, you know, not visible on camera, but I can see cracks actually along the edge and stuff in it. So it is starting to degrade. Nice clean oil inside it, so it has been changed fairly regularly, but yeah, we're going to get this thing out. I'm going to actually pull off the alternator there as well, but that's kind of it. We're nearly in. Okay guys, rolling back underneath. Have a couple of bits and pieces gone off of there now. Alternator is taken off and I have access from the bottom. The bit that I'm most concerned about, and this, if anyone is doing this, even if they're doing it without the locking kit, the bit that I'm concerned about is that little hole and a little, it's at 1 o'clock I often call it, but there's a little indentation in there that lines up with the pulley, okay, in there. I just can't get that pin out now because I'm shaking it out. I'm shaking the camera. But that slides into that little hole that's up and in there, slides into that and into a little cutout that's inside it, okay, at 1 o'clock. That's the bit I'm worried about. That crankshaft pulley carries the tone ring for the crankshaft reference point and yeah, injectors to fire and the spark to fire and all that. So that has to be in the right place, okay? So I'm going to put in that correct. I then put a little marker there and a marker there. Now this is only for lads that are not using the actual locking tool. The locking pin actually goes in up here, just above the actual drive shaft, okay? Now I've also gone in here and I've put a marker here. So that flywheel marking with the ring gear onto the side of the bell housing of the gearbox, that marking there, and I'll show you the top stuff in a minute. But right now I'm going to lock that at this point in here where the starter has come out, okay? So my little locking tool, i.e. this little one, is going to go in there to lock the engine in place. At that stage, once that's in place, I'm going to put in my locking tool here and verify my stuff fits on the top. Don't really have to, but look, we'll just sit up there just for the crack. And then I'm going to get a big bar on that, longer the better. If it's about 5 foot long T-bar, you're away in a hack, okay? Just pull out of that will open relatively handy once that's locking it. When I'm putting it back together, if I didn't have the pins, I'd now mark up the top as well, but I'll show you those marks in a second once I'm up the top, or what we can use up there instead of the locking. Okay guys, back up the top, just to give you a visual on this thing, okay? If you don't have the locking tools, okay? So that's the camshaft locking tool in place. If you don't have them, I'm only just putting a marker there, marker here. Then I'm using this, but you can just use these with the markings on the crank pulley, with the markings on the crank, and that's going to make sure that everything is back in place where it should be when you're putting it back together. I'm going to bring this thing up, and before I take off that mountain, I'm going to swing out of the crank pulley with that bar, get that pulley out, open, moving, and get off our cover then and get in at the belt. I need to change this thing and get it done to close this thing up and start reinstating bits and pieces. There's my big bar sitting in situ. Oh, I did take off the sump. I don't know if I showed you that coming off or not, but I did take off the sump. There's my big bar sitting in situ up inside my oil strainer. It is actually spotless clean. So we don't have a huge amount of depredation from belts coming up. There's my big bear. All the way down. So I'm going to go single-handed, and I'm going to tell you I did crack this already, but it is still okay, tight. But a big long bear and torque multiplier is in hand, sitting there. That's my thought on it there. Okay guys, where am I at now? What have I done? Some people mark the bolts, but there's only one there and one just down there. So it's the second bolt, first actual bolt nearly up from where the sump bolts on are, right behind the crank sensor. Both of those bolts are the only two different bolts that are in this thing. Therefore, lining up or getting the cover in the right place when it's going on. Then I have two size 13 bolts here, 13 bolt in here in the middle of the sump, and then a 13 bolt in here, which takes off when you know the strength for the engine mounting here. I don't touch these phasers at all. I have tooling for them, we're down here, but I don't use them at all. And that, in theory, I've all the bolts taken out of this, so I did give it a little fast push. What I actually want to point out here, sorry, before I go on any further, is I don't try and take off the water pump. I'm not going to try and take off that plastic housing here. I just pull that water hose out of the back, or at least loosen it out. It was loose, so you can see that coming loose. I leave that plastic housing on it because it breaks in the back of this timing cover, and I'm actually leaving the water pump in place or in situ. Now there is two bolts that run through just there and there, so they're like a bigger, longer version in the actual water pump, and those two bolts are going through the timing cover. I'm actually just levering, going through the timing cover, and they're holding the timing cover on or in place, whatever it may be. This is all coming off, I'm hoping, are going to come off relatively easy with one hand. I don't want to break anything. Okay, we're up, we're out. That's good. Okay, there we go. So you can see the way it actually comes apart without touching that and or removing the water pump or any of that stuff. We have new seals here. Ford parts, Ford time belt kit, oil pump belt, Fomoco oil filter, a couple of gaskets, O-rings, new bolt. There's our part number for new bolt. Kind of an important little shim here. That part number, that's that little washer that reinstates in between the crank pulley and the actual crankshaft. Oil, seal, and then whatever the heck else is inside in them boxes. I didn't open them as of yet. Timing belt kit. These are the easiest timing belts you'll ever get in at once the stuff is taken off. The task is getting in to get the stuff off, if that makes sense. But anyway, here we are. We're in there now. Time to swap this belt out. And as I said there, it's really simple. Crank is locked. Cam is locked. Nothing can go anywhere. Okay, I've just pulled off the 10 bolt at the middle of the tensioner. Nice and easy. Crank bolt off. That time belt, if I can get my hands down, which I can. There is no timing on the actual oil pump. Belt off. Other belt going to be reinstated. Actually, I'll get you back in once I have them fitted back on it, okay? So the pulleys are not, they're floating pulleys, so they are not related to timing at all. It's just a crank being held and the camshafts being held for us because we've locking tools. I have another video on this, which performs quite well, as I said there, that I've done it without the actual locking tools whatsoever. But then thereafter, they're actually cheap. So for anyone is looking at these, you buy them for about $100 maybe on eBay or Amazon or something. I'm going to reinstate my new belts and tensioner. Oil pump belt on, cam belt going in. The only bit that I'm actually concerned with right now, if you can see it, is in there. I want that little tab to go into the hole, just above the bolt hole. And then I have a bolt in hand, which I might not be able to get in without, while holding my second hand holding the camera. And I need to get that into my threaded piece, which is an easy or a simple job, but just while I'm holding the camera, it's not quite as easy as doing it with two hands. Right, she's kind of just hanging there for time, and it's good enough for me. The only bit, as I said, the only bit we're concerned about here is just being taut there and relatively taut here, because this is a floating pulley. So once the tension comes on, that pulley will just boom, tighten that. The only bit that can't move is that bit in there because of these actual locking tools on the camshafts, okay? Time to torque that, and we'll pull that pin down at that stage. Okay guys, bolt tight, torqued, and then pin pulled. So all that happens is the spring loaded tension on the tensioner, boom, it only sits on in one place. With that, it'll divot in one spot, and the bolt in another place. Belts on, slack gone. Time to start cleaning up and reinstating our covers and stuff. The reverse psychology on the way back. New seal, new gasket, which you can't actually see there, and a little sliver of sealer all the way down and around. Also sealer put on them little two bolt holes. Time for it to go back in and sat on, had that cleaned up there as well, the block itself and the side of the cylinder head. Time for the cover to go in, and then we're going to start maybe rolling back down the bottom, try and get the sump cleaned up and the sump stuck up and sealed also. Cover sat in guys, but the one thing I'm going to point out is those two yellow marking bolts are going to be the first two, because the task that they do is they align or hold the cover in the right positioning for you to get the rest of your standard bolts, which they are all the same, outside of those two, back in the actual right place, okay? So it's only a case of getting in them two, or those two, and thereafter you just kind of roll on. I'm only looking for another hole for another bolt. But that's kind of it. So those two ones are the fussy ones, and thereafter then drive on in, start all the rest of them and get it squared up. From the bottom guys, as I said, they're very, very easy, no tensioner sitting on that. That actually pulley can still float. If the camshaft at the top wasn't locked, I could still rotate cams and belts if needs be while I was assembling, but I don't need to. As you're aware, that little pin, the little pin goes in just there, in and locks up against the crankshaft. Just there, okay? So that in theory is locked at this point in time. Our yellow mark that we were pointing at earlier on is still there. And I'm always going to use my marks, but I'm going to be using the other marks, the two yellow marks, if need be, if I don't have or didn't have locking tools. With that little locking tab in there, holding, because when we're pulling, we're going to be pulling clockwise. Am I going right? Am I actually touching? Yes. While I'm pulling that way, we're actually pressing against that. But also, we have our locking device up and in where the starter would be. Can you see it there? Okay, you can see it there. So this is only just going to be a big, huge squeeze like what it came out, okay? If anyone's wondering what am I using for supporting the actual engine, I'm supporting it from that bearing of the drive shaft on that Welch engine support. I don't know, WELCH or something like that. And look, I'm just seeing the part number there, 3996. But that's what I'm using to support my engine while all these other bits and pieces are taken off. We're going to have to get in here, reinstate our cover. Bit of a cleaning up to be done around here and to be done on the sump, which is over my oil drainer across the workshop there. But that's kind of it. I'm just going to clarify for any doubting Thomases, that is absolutely spotless in there. I don't know if you can see it, but I can very much see it. You can see in there, can you? It is absolutely spotless in there. Okay? Just verifying that I don't need to go in there, okay? Little washer or shim instated. Our crank pulley then is sitting in there after. I'm going to put in the new crank bolt in there. Once we spin that in, then I'm going to align my little 1 o'clock pin into place, and that's it. Then we will squeeze, okay? So I'm only just pulling that in snug home. So it's going to have to be there at the 1 o'clock mark. I get my pin in there, and then we give a good pull on this thing. Pulley up and in place, pinning in place, big bear on the actual crank pulley, and now I'm going to swing out of that as hard as I can. We know our crank can't rotate because it's pressed against the block here and that rotating tab, and also, as I said before, the locking device is in the ring gear, okay? So now it's time to horse or pull out of this. Again, no torque converter. I'm not going to be led and said by anyone that tells me that something needs to be I kind of dictate my own destiny, and this is not going to go wrong. The numerous and multiple times I've done belts on these things, a good swing and a good pull. I can open it. All I have to do is make it as tight as it was when it was coming out. That's it. Sealer applied to the oil pan, ready to be offered up. A little sliver of sealer on all of the joints. And that's it. Time to pop up, cover back on. Time to pop up our Sump or oil pan. Sump fitted back up and on. We tightened our crank pulley earlier. I've actually taken out my pins and the locking tool off the top. I've just done 2 rotations just to make sure that everything is lining up. So I have my pin back in here at 1 o'clock, and I have this pin at this stage ready to come out. So I am happy about where our markings are sitting. So I want the crank locked in the right position, and I want that pulley at the 1 o'clock mark with that pin going in and out, which I have. So right now we're ready to start squeezing up. If you wanted to pay attention to our homemade marks, if lads were going to be looking at it, that our little mark in there, a bit doubly uppy because I wasn't actually physically on a tooth, so it is kind of going in a little bit further. But that is in theory where we had it lined up, and then up the top we have the same things. I'm not going to drop the lift down at this point to show you, but it is in the right position and we are happy. I'm going to start motoring on back down here, maybe fitting there's air conditioning pumps and stuff before I actually drop our down on the ground to get a couple of bits on the top together. Starter motor back in place, little blocking cap back in place, alternator sitting in place, tensioner, guide, and I left the AC pump just hanging there for a moment because I kind of have some kind of a feeling that the loom comes down and has to fit in somewhere awkwardly in here. So I'm going to leave it sitting at that point, drop it down, attack from the top of the loom, and then maybe start reinstating a few bits up top and then tighten that a little bit after. I think, it's just those 2 block connectors for the clutch and stuff on the AC pump that kind of sits in somewhere there awkwardly, but just off the head, I can't rightly remember right now. Rocker cover reinstated. Injectors and rail just gone in at this point in time, cleaned up down the holes. Generally, people might say, oh, hey, why didn't you wash all the rocker cover and all that kind of stuff? I don't wash parts too much when they're off. I clean the mating surfaces, etc., to stop or inhibit any oil leaks. You can see a little sliver of sealer there on all the adjoining sections. But I generally don't clean parts. But what I'll do is once the car is done, I will generally wash the engine, which again I will do. People would say, oh, that's wrong, that's bad. I'm doing it with a couple of years. If you go to buy a new car inside in a workshop, what you won't see is a dirty engine bay. And the reason you won't see a dirty engine bay is because someone has washed it primarily to you seeing it. So I do the same. Once the car is back together and up and running, has done a couple of miles and I'm happy, I will then give the engine bay a wash and everything looks nice, clean, kosher. But I don't wash parts individually. A lot of the time on any of these jobs, and anyone that knows this business, we're very aware at all points in time of time. So you're trying to give your customer, an efficient service. If anything goes wrong, you need to have enough of a gap in order to fix or resolve that ailment to still meet the deadline that you set before you got the job. So everything is always time conscious. But here I'm not washing parts individually. I'll wash them all when they're together and as one piece, okay? But anyway, we're continuing on, going to squeeze and torque down these injectors and then replace a few gaskets over here, start getting back on a turbo up the front. At that stage, engine mountings and stuff are reinstated. Yeah, we're getting there slowly but surely. The grumpy bit or the awkward bit that I kind of remembered, I didn't remember, I actually thought I was going to get caught on something, was the crankshaft. On the wiring harness, the crankshaft position sensor sits in just underneath the AC pump. So luckily I didn't have it bolted on and didn't have to retract or reverse or any of that crack. It's now sat in place, okay? Just don't get caught. Okay guys, in my overnight thought and I'm thinking, my P0420 catalyst efficiency could be caused by that bolt that was loose. Because if that's not tight, well, we could potentially be getting air in here and creating a lean condition, couldn't I? Have a going again. This is my 3rd time in 2 days that I'm going to be firing up this. Now, I normally use oxyacetylene torch over there, but on this occasion, we're going to be going to get that use that. But that could create our catalyst efficiency fault. Nice new gasket in situ, nice new bolt in stud in situ, and then the other 3 ran back in with the nuts taken off them, ready for the catalyst to go up and on. Turbo feed, return, couple of water pipes, heat shields and etc. put on. Still have to connect my oxygen sensors into place, and I still have to put in a couple of air intake pipes, but we're getting very, very close to the finish line. So another 20 minutes or half an hour, should have my couple of air intake pipes put on, HVAC pipes. I think then at that stage we're getting close to a turn of the key. Okay guys, we are what I believe to be back together. So anywhere I've looked and routed, and every nut and bolt, bar the new gaskets and stuff, are gone off my tray. Any clips, water hoses, have it filled with coolant, have the new oil filter gone on, have oil gone into it. That's kind of it. I'm hoping we're going to get in. I didn't turn the key yet. Will it be hard to start? Will it be easy to start? Or what? I do not know. Will our battery be semi-flat? To squeeze in here. 1 second. There's this little LEDs that to be flashing, and I dislike those immensely. Okay, we have clutch pressed. We turn on our ignition first. Okay, the wiper's just done a queer stuff there. Okay, is she going to take a long time to start? Is she going to be slow to start? What's going to happen? Crikey, we're going straight away. Oh, she got. I was going to say we're going straight away, but I had an oil light on. But it was only because of the oil and filter that's been renewed. But she started. Actually, mightily easy, didn't it? I was going to say, I might stink. That's me giving my face an attempt of a wipe. Okay, she's running. Whew. Bit of work involved in these, a lot of stripping. The time belt is the easiest item you'll ever get in at. It's the easiest time belt you'll ever get in at. I have lots of smoke and stuff. There's Marvin. I have some kind of steam that I had rising up there. You can see it there, can we? No, sure, look, it don't matter, we can jump out and we'll have a look. But we're running with no warning lights on the dash. Now I do know, and I am aware, that we had that P420, but I'm hoping that maybe that bolt that was left out of here might have been causing that, creating an air leak in the way, which in theory would have given me a kind of a lean, potentially output from our second lambda sensor. Maybe, even though it looked good to us. But for now, we're up, we're running. We'll give it a wash and we'll close up after a mile or 2 or 3, okay? That is that, lads. I actually was out for a drive, but unfortunately I forgot to record while I was driving. Car is driving the finest, everything doing what it should do. I'm showing you that when I actually... So I go and wash, as I said there, and just make everything clean, crisp, as it should be. One of the boys washed the actual car itself, and it's sitting there done and finished at this point in time. Any final thoughts? The locking tools are handy in this case. They do work better, to be honest with you. That 1 o'clock mark on the crank pulley is very, very important. What actually causes this? Buy the OE Ford oil for it. So it's oil specific for that engine that stops the belt from degrading, if that makes sense. It's a belt that causes them to degrade. But in this case, the belt was good. The thing is flashing up at me. In this case, the belt was good and we didn't have any problems with it. I'd say someone was in here at some stage before me, because there was certain little bits that didn't look OE, and I just thought the seal, or maybe on the sumps, etc., were not exactly as they were put on, you know, back in 2018. So I'd say the reason for the belt condition was because it was renewed at some stage. That's it, guys. Another wet belt video, maybe boring, but we are done. Please like and subscribe if my hints and tips are any good to you, and I'll see you on the next cartoon. Peter Kennedy, lads, signing out. Thanks for watching.